All right, Ms. Clowans here. We're going to go ahead and look at our 4.5 notes, which are going to continue talking about standard form, but instead of converting them to y equals mx plus b, we're just going to learn how to graph straight from standard form. So this is our, like I said, this is our second option for graphing from standard form, and we call it using our intercepts. So when we have an equation in standard form, it's always in this form ax plus by equals c. So that's the first step. Our second step to use intercepts would be to cover up our y term. So we cover this up, we pretend that that's not there for a minute, and it's, and we're going to solve it for x. So it would look like ax equals c. So if we get rid of the by, it's just ax equals c. And whatever we get would be our x-intercept. And then we do the same thing, but we cover up the x term and we solve for y. So it would be by equals c. And that is called our y-intercept. And then if we're going to go to graph this, we would plot both the intercepts, one on our x-axis, one on our y-axis, and then connect our points. And then we have a line. But before we are graphing, we're going to look at how to find them just like from the equation, and then also how to find slope. So to find slope of an equation in standard form, we use this formula that says m equals negative a, so negative of the first number in front of x divided by your b value. So let's look at some examples. So I put our formulas up here for us. So this first one, we have 3x plus 6y equals 18. So first I'm going to fill in what my a and b are. So my a is 3 and my b is 6. And we're going to use these to find slope. So to find slope, we have m equals, and it's going to be a fraction, right? So we have negative a. So negative a would be negative 3. So this 3 became negative in here. And b is 6. Well, just like before, if we have a fraction and we can simplify it, well, we should simplify it. So negative 3 over 6 is the same thing as negative 1/2. So this means that the slope of our line, 3x plus 6y equals 18, is negative 1/2. So if we graphed this, we would get this as a slope. Or if we used what we learned in 4.4 and we moved the 3x over and divided everything by 6, we would get negative 1/2 as our slope. All right. So to find our x-intercept, if we think back to those steps earlier, we said to cover up the other variable. So for finding the x-intercept, we'd cover up the y. So if we cover up the plus 6y, we have 3x equals 18. Well, to get x by itself, if you just have a number being multiplied by it, you're just going to divide. So we divide by 3 on both sides, right? Or divide everything by 3. Well, 18 divided by 3 would get us 6. So that means on a graph, we would make a point where x is 6 for our x-intercept. So we're going to do the same thing for the y-intercept, instead of covering up the y, we're going to cover up the x. So we have a positive 6y equals 18. I leave the plus sign there because if it's a minus sign, well, then we have to make sure we're dividing by that negative. So think about this as like dividing by a positive 6 on both sides. Well, 18 divided by 6 gets us 3. So our y-intercept is 3. So we're going to do the same thing for this next one now. So we have 2x minus 7y equals 14. Our a value is 2, our b value is negative 7. When we go to put this into slope formula, well, I have negative 2, so negative a, over b, so over negative 7. Again, can we simplify negative 2 over negative 7? Well, 2 over 7 would simplify, or negative 2 over negative 7 would simplify to just positive 2 over positive 7, because negative divided by negative, right, gives us a positive number. So for our x-intercept, we're going to do exactly what we did in this last one. So I'm going to rewrite the equation, and to find my x, I have to cover up my y. So I just have 2x equals 14. So now I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to get x by itself. Well, 14 divided by 2, that gets us 7. So for y, we're going to cover up x. So we have negative 7y equals 14. And then we're going to divide by negative 7 on both sides. 14 divided by negative 7 gets us negative 2. All right, so we're going to do one more like this, and then you guys will try one of these on your own. So this one just says x minus y equals 4. So it looks a little bit different because we don't have numbers, but we can assume what numbers are in front of those x and y's, right? So we assume there's a 1 in front of the x and a -1 in front of the y because of this minus sign. So when we put this into our formula, we would have -1 over -1. Well, -1 over -1 just simplifies to 1 over 1, or you could just say equals 1. Obviously, when we graph, we want it to be a fraction, but if you're just writing a slope and you're not graphing it, you could have just put equals 1. It's kind of up to you, all right? So for the x-intercept, when we're finding them, I'm going to leave the ones there just so we know what we're dividing by. So I'm going to cover up my y, divide both sides by 1. Well, 4 divided by 1 is just 4. So that means our x-intercept is 4. For our y-intercept, we would cover up the x, and we have -1y equals 4, so we're dividing by a -1, so y equals -4. All right, so you guys are going to go ahead and try this next one, so you can either pause the video, try it now, and then play the video when you're done with it, or you can wait till the end. That's kind of up to you, all right? So we're going to go ahead now and look at when we're actually going to graph. So when we graph, we only need to find our x and our y intercepts. You could find your slope, but you don't need it if you have your 2 points, because remember, all you need is 2 points to be able to graph a line. Just keep in mind that some of these are equations and some are inequalities. So if they're equations, we're just going to worry about finding our 2 points and connecting them. But if there's inequalities, well, then we have to remember the few extra things we need to do. All right. So for our x-intercept, I'm going to do exactly what we just did. So I'm going to rewrite my equation. I'm going to cover up my -2y. Well, now I'm going to divide by 3. 12 divided by 3 gets us 4. So eventually we're going to make a point where x is 4. But we'll do that after we find our y-intercept, all right? So the y-intercept, same thing, cover up my x. So I have -2y equals 12. And then if I divide both sides by -2, well, y equals -6. So I'm going to make a point where x is 4 and where y is -6. So those are our intercepts. And then all we have to do is connect them, right? Because remember, we only need 2 points to make a line. So once we have the 2 points, then we're good to go. We can connect them, make our line, and move on to the next question, okay? So for 2 here, we have 10x minus 5y is greater than or equal to 30. So we have this inequality. So let's still just worry about our x and y intercepts first, but then we're going to have to think about our line. We're going to have to think about shading before we can finish. So for our x-intercept, again, I rewrote the inequality. I wrote it as just an equation because our intercept is still a point. It's not like, it's not an inequality. We don't need an inequality as an answer. So we're just going to use an equal sign for now, but we'll still worry about the inequality after. So I'm going to divide both sides by 10. Well, 30 divided by 10 gets us 3. For our y-intercept, we have 10x minus 5y equals 30. Cover up the 10, divide by -5, and y gets us -6. Or y equals -6, should I say. So let's make our points. So we have a point at 3 and a point at -6. Before I draw my line, though, we have to think about what type of line we need, right? And about shading. So remember, for your type of line, you look at your inequality. If it has the line underneath it, or if it has the or equal to, then you can use a solid line. So let's go ahead and draw that line. When we think about shading, though, sometimes we might use shading and think, do we shade up or do we shade down, which normally works, but it doesn't work from standard form all the time. I'll show you why. So if you think back a while, we mentioned using a test point. So using a test point means take some point that's on the graph that's not on the line. So I'm going to take 0, 0 because that's easy to plug in. So taking this point 0, 0, if we plug it in for both the x and the y, we're going to have 10 times 0 minus 5 times 0. Well, that whole side of the inequality would just be 0. And then it would still have greater than or equal to 30. And then we want to see, okay, is 0 greater than or equal to 30? No, that's not true, right? 0 is not bigger than 30, nor is it equal to 30. So that means that 0, 0 isn't a solution. So we'd want to shade the opposite direction. So in this case, I'm going to say we're going to shade down because it's opposite of where 0, 0 is. Okay. Another reason that we could know that we're going to have to shade the opposite direction is if you use what we did in 4.4, where we converted this to slope-intercept form, we would have had to divide by a -5. And if you divide by a negative number, you have to flip your inequality around. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes we have to, we're going to have to do the opposite of the inequality. So if you're graphing straight from standard form, I would think of using a test point instead of thinking shading up or shading down. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this next inequality. So we have 4x plus 2y is greater than 12. So I'm gonna, again, not worry about the inequality till the end. So for my x-intercept, I rewrite my equation, cover up my y, and then divide everything by the 4. So x is equal, 12 divided by 4 gets us 3. For the y-intercept, we had 4x plus 2y equals 12, so we cover up our 4x, divide both sides by 2. Well, 12 divided by 2 gets us 6. So when we plot this, we have x is 3 and y is 6. And now let's think about our line. Well, if it's just greater than, then we have to use a dashed line. And then for shading, again, let's think about a test point. So if we plug 0, 0 in, remember 0, 0 is right in the middle here. So we plug it in, we would get 0 is greater than 12. Well, 0 is not greater than 12, right? So that means we want to shade the opposite direction of where that test point is. So in this case, we would shade up. So I'm going to shade all of this, which is what this inequality says, right? This inequality says greater than, and we shade it up. But we had to check to make sure that we wouldn't have had to flip that sign around, right? So last one that we'll do together. So we have 5x plus 2y equals 10. So for my x-intercept, I'm going to cover up the y. So I have 5x equals 10, divide both sides by 5. Well, x just gets to be 2. For the y-intercept, we can cover up our x. So we have 2y equals 10. And if we divide both sides by 2 this time, we're going to get 5. So we have a point at 2 on the x-axis and a point at 5 on the y-axis. And because this is just an equation, we can just connect these with a normal line, right? So these next two examples you are going to try on your own. So you had one question from the first group of tables, and then you have 2 more to try, all right? So go ahead and whether you did the first question already or not, go ahead and finish these last 2, and then you'll be good to go.